In 8 full seasons at Georgia Tech, Paul Johnson has taken recruiting classes that have ranked in the 50 to 80 range and typically gotten more out of those classes on the field and in the ACC standings. We bring in Joey Weaver from the Rumble seat to help us break down the 2015 class with National Signing Day just about, let's say, 6 days and counting at this point. Joey, thanks so much for joining us as always. So we'd love to hear the latest because it sounds like Georgia Tech's still in the mix for some pretty high-quality athletes.
Yeah, they sure are. So this coming weekend, they've got really a pretty good lineup coming in as far as some highly rated guys. I think the premier guy on that lineup would be five-star athlete Demetrius Robertson. He's from Savannah. He's one of the top uncommitted players in the entire country. The thought is that he is very much interested in going to Stanford. The question now becomes whether he has the test scores. I think this past weekend he backed off of a visit to Alabama so that he could retake the SAT. If he gets his test scores, it sounds like he's got his mind made up that he wants to go to Stanford. That said, if that doesn't come across, there's all sorts of possibilities there. Apparently has interest not only in Alabama but also in Georgia as well as Notre Dame. Then again, he's visiting Georgia Tech this weekend. That's got to be a good sign. The word on the street is that his mom really likes Georgia Tech and would love him there. That might play a factor into this whole thing. I wouldn't put a whole lot of money on it, if I were a betting man. But at the same time, it's nice to have that possibility. It would be a first for Paul Johnson getting one of those five-star type of guys. Easily the highest-rated recruit to come to Georgia Tech since Calvin Johnson. That said, you've got other guys. So the other big one coming in would be LSU offensive line commit Donovan Campbell. He's been committed to LSU for a long time. He's from just barely east of Baton Rouge. He's, again, a top-rated guy. He's the type of guy that nobody just walks into Louisiana and plucks away from LSU. That just doesn't happen. The only reason that the door is open for Georgia Tech right now is his brother, Christian Campbell, is coming off of a redshirt season. He's set to be a quarterback at Georgia Tech. And then also another one of his high school teammates, Jazeel Lee, flipped from Louisiana Lafayette and now is committed to Georgia Tech as of earlier this week. And so Campbell, there might be enough pull there to kind of persuade him to end up at Georgia Tech. And he, too, would be easily one of the highest-rated commitments of the Paul Johnson era and certainly up there over the last decade and a half for Georgia Tech. After that, you've also got another offensive lineman coming in, Jordan Johnson. He was actually a previous commitment of Georgia Tech, and he ended up decommitting shortly after the Georgia game in a somewhat well-publicized event where he said that he was racially profiled by the police at the event, and there was an altercation, and it was a bit of a mess. He decommitted at that point. Since then, I'm not sure that he's gotten a ton of attention from a lot of top-scale programs. He, this month, has taken visits to Central Florida as well as Georgia Southern. And coming into Georgia Tech would at this point be easily his top option from a football standpoint. And so it's going to be interesting to watch and see what happens with that. He might have kind of soured on Tech at that time, but then kind of come back around in the time since. So those are going to be your three primary visitors on campus. Again, two of them very high-profile, like national-level guys, which if either one of them were to commit to Georgia Tech would be pretty monumental on the level of Georgia Tech recruiting.
And so based on what you're hearing, what are the chances? Could you put a percentage factor on the probabilities of Georgia Tech nabbing any one of the three or individually?
Sure. So Robertson, for me, the five-star, I'm not betting on that one. That one is kind of I think that one's kind of a get lucky kind of thing. Not a good percentage chance, maybe 5-10%. Not great. For Campbell, I would almost put that one in a coin flip. And again, this feels bizarre to be saying this considering his history with LSU, the type of school that LSU is when it comes to recruiting, the location that we're talking about, which is right in LSU's backyard. Again, you don't just walk in there willy-nilly and start pulling their recruits out from under them. And yet, I could kind of see this one being a bit of a coin flip as far as which school he ends up at. So that'll be interesting. And Johnson, it's hard to gauge, again, given the history of the situation, but I would say there's actually a pretty good chance that Georgia Tech ends up with him if the coaches do decide that they would like to take him. They do need at least one more offensive lineman in this class, and I would say that he would be a lot better than several of the other alternatives that they might have available.
Joey, as I alluded to off the top, and you could detail this much better than I can, I would consider Georgia Tech under Paul Johnson to be a fringe top 25 team most of the time, more so in that 40 range, let's say, aside from 2014. Talking about the recruiting classes and making that direct correlation, they've certainly produced better on the field than the recruiting rankings would lead us to believe would be the expectations. Coming off 3-9 and just one win in the conference, the expectations, I think, for yourself were pretty low coming into this offseason. But it looks to be a pretty good recruited class at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, typically they've fallen between the 40 and maybe the 60 range when it comes to recruiting. And obviously there's been a couple of outliers here and there, but that's kind of been where they've lived over the last several years under Coach Johnson. Whereas on the field, it's certainly been top 40 to, like you said, top, fringe top 25 performances, with 2014 being the exception. And so, again, a straight numerical comparison, they are outperforming their recruiting rankings. So that's certainly a good sign. The coaches are also the types that they're not afraid, and they haven't ever backed off of offering guys that aren't getting a lot of hype nationally. They're well known for that, guys that they'll go and they'll see and they'll like them in person, and they don't really care if they have other big time offers. They're not afraid to make those offers themselves. And so I've gotten to a point where I kind of trust them and their judgment, looking at their track record of what are guys rated versus what do they produce on the field. This is an argument that we love to have from the Rumble seat is, do recruiting rankings matter? And it's very easy to go point at several two-star players, Adam Gotsis, PJ Davis, guys who were not heralded at all that had come in and started as freshmen, or certainly got a lot of time as freshmen and became stars later on. So that said, like you said, the 2015 season, obviously very disappointing. It's a 3-9 season. And that's not the kind of thing that's going to bump up your recruiting and really get a lot of prospects excited about the program. And yet we came into January and you start looking at the recruiting class, what it was ranked, the type of guys that they had committed at the time. And it was definitely something to be worried about. I think at the time they were ranked around the 80 mark on both 24/7 and Rivals. They were one of the lowest rated recruiting classes of all the Power 5 programs. You're talking about they were in the same realm as a Kansas and some other programs that Georgia Tech does not want to be associated with on a football level. That said, in January, they have done an incredible job of locking down several top targets. So like we said last time, after the first visit weekend, they got Jay Jones, one of the top athletes of the state of Alabama. And then this past week, they actually had 4 commitments within 36 hours following a visit weekend, which made it for a pretty crazy Sunday into Monday night. The big ones, they had 3 players flip off of prior commitments. One of them was Jaziel Lee, like I said, flipped off of Louisiana Lafayette, where he had been committed for several months. That came right after his visit this weekend. They had 2 other players that had visited the previous weekend that were committed elsewhere. So that would be Brandon Adams, defensive tackle, was committed to Vanderbilt. He committed this past Monday or Sunday, I guess, after visiting Vanderbilt officially this weekend, and officially flipped later that night after that visit. That's a big deal for Georgia Tech right there, because he's listed on recruiting sites anywhere between 290 and 325 pounds. If he is anywhere near even the midpoint of that range, he'll come in day one and be the heaviest player in Georgia Tech's defense. And so that's really a presence in the middle that they've been lacking. And so that's a big one for them. And then Monday night, Coach Johnson and I believe his quarterbacks coach, Brian Cook, went and had an in-home visit with Lucas Johnson, who was a quarterback who was committed to San Diego State, is from San Diego himself. And, after, again, he visited the previous weekend, this past weekend, he was at San Diego State. Monday night, after that in-home visit, he ended up flipping to Georgia Tech as well. A very good passer. A lot of people really like what they see from him, both from a passing standpoint as well as an athleticism, a running standpoint. So That was another big pickup for Georgia Tech. So they've added 5 commitments over the past 10, 11 days, and it looks good moving forward. And so after, again, a pretty disappointing season, it's a really commendable job I think this coaching staff has done of circling the wagons and really making it happen and doing a great job here in the month of January.
National Signing Day is fast approaching, just about 6 days away, and Georgia Tech getting some work done under the wire. Joey Weaver from the Rumble Seat joining us to break down Georgia Tech. Thanks, Joey.
Thanks, Mark.